How's it going, Yankee fans? Welcome back to Fireside Yankees with your boys Alex and Ryan. Today we're discussing the left field options after Michael Conforto signed a 2-year, $36 million deal with the San Francisco Giants. Now, of course, the Giants missed out on Rodon. They missed out on Judge. Obviously, they let Correa walk after the kind of weird medical thing rose, and the Mets one swooped in and signed him to a big deal. But they landed Conforto, last remaining high upside left field option. And the Yankees now are kind of sitting like, what do we do now? Obviously, the trade market seems to be the most likely avenue, the most likely scenario that we will see Brian Cashman dip his hand into. Yesterday he was texting back and forth during Rodon's introductory press conference saying that they're going to be looking at potential deals. He was texting with another GM about, maybe packaging some prospects or players for a player that we just don't know who it was. Could have been Brian Reynolds, could have been Max Kepler. Right now, it seems to be those two guys are the primary options. The Arizona Diamondbacks were also mentioned. Michael A. Taylor from the Kansas City Royals, who I would not like to touch as a starting left fielder. But looking at Kepler, I really want to discuss him. We talked about Brian Reynolds a lot yesterday and over the last couple of days, really. But Kepler seems to be the most realistic one because of his price tag and how much it's going to cost to actually acquire him in the first place and the package of players that they might be able to get him for. So, Ryan, before we dive into it, how are you feeling today, and what are you feeling about this Conforto news?
Yeah, so first off, I'm doing great. No problems here, even without Michael Conforto. Ultimately, the way I look at this is that we talked about this like right before we recorded at $18 million for 2022, 2023. That basically knocked the Yankees out of that bidding. I don't think the Yankees are going to be willing to invest $18 million when they've already pushed themselves around what $290 million in terms of their payroll. They're trying to look to shed some payroll at this point. They're not going to be pushing $300 million for Michael Conforto, right? As much of the upside as Michael Conforto has, and I do like Conforto, that's not a player you really push yourself into 310 potentially $1 million to get, because you kind of can. I feel like another thing about this too is how is his defense going to play in left field at Yankee Stadium? That was a massive question mark. How is he going to play in general is a massive question mark. What does his max exit velocity look like in 2023? What does his power output look like? Power output look like in 2023? If he doesn't play well, you're on the hook for another $18 million in 2024. That significantly hinders what you can do next year. You know what I mean? So, I understand why the Yankees didn't take that route. I understand why the Yankees didn't take that risk. Ultimately, at this point, the trade market is obviously that's the only thing remaining. I mean, unless we want to count Jerickson Profar, but I don't think Jerickson Profar's defensive profile works very well for New York. He kind of struggled with his outs above average in left field, so that doesn't really seem like a realistic fit. Ultimately, trade wise, there's obviously Max Kepler. Max Kepler has kind of become the guy that seems like the most realistic option because he's the only guy that really you're not going to trade a lot to get. Is left-handed and has a similar situation where got 1 year and that second year is a club option. He's very cheap, so you can acquire him if he's a dud. You can make him a fourth outfielder and trade for a left fielder, and then just not pick up his club option. Right? Worst case scenario, for not even half your season, because if he really struggles, you can just start playing Cabrera out there. So realistically, for like 1.5 months, he can be pretty bad for you if he doesn't pan out. But best case scenario, he figures it out with the bat, and he's he hits 20 plus home runs. Has a higher OBP. He's a guy who is going to benefit from no shift next year. I look at him as the guy, and he's a great defender. So I look at him as the guy that I think if you asked me who's the most likely guy the Yankees end up with, I would say Max Kepler. The Twins have another option at left field in Luis Arraez, and Luis Arraez, he's a lot less likely because he's a very, very, very good hitter. I believe he won the batting title in the American League, if I'm not mistaken. There are some question marks about his defense left field. He was a 3+3 DRS guy in 2021, but a -1 OAA guy. So, conflicting reports on his defense there. And the bat obviously is very good. I mean, he's again batting champion, 375 OBP last year, 131 WRC plus, projects for a 126 WRC plus. But is he more of an infielder? Is he more of an outfielder? How willing are the Twins to trade him? There were reports saying they were looking to move him for pitching. Realistically, the best trade chip the Yankees have pitching wise outside of guys in their rotation is Clark Schmidt. And I like Clark Schmidt, but is he in a package enough to entice the Twins? I have no idea. I think he has great stuff. I think, a lot of, if you look at stuff plus, if you look at pitching plus, his curveball and his slider are absolutely disgusting. A 136.6 stuff plus on the curveball. And on the slider, it was a 125.3. his sinker is a league average pitch in terms of pitching plus. So, at least he has a league average fastball to go alongside two elite breaking balls. But how is his projectability as a starter? Is he more of a reliever? That's definitely a question worth asking. He's also 27 years old. I'm pretty sure, yeah, he's older than Luis Arraez. So, and I'm not sure how intrigued that you would be, how enticing it would be for the Twins, especially since there's probably other teams that have younger, maybe better starters available on that trade front. You look at Arizona, there's Jake McCarthy, Alec Thomas, and Darton Varsho. Varsho's more of a center fielder. He could play left field, but you kind of kill a lot of your value when you take a guy who's great in center field and you move him to left field. Why are you trading? That takes, a Dominguez, a Peraza. That's like a Brian Reynolds type package right there. He's a 5-WAR player who's really young and got a ton of control. Jake McCarthy's a guy who doesn't have a lot of power, but has a lot higher whiff rates. You know what I mean? His strikeout rate was not high or anything last year, but he whiffs a lot and he chases a lot. So the sustainability of that strikeout rate's a little bit questionable. And then Alec Thomas is a big question mark. He's a prospect who his stock fell a lot after last season. So, looking at the other options on the market, it's a lot of risk. And if you want to get someone who isn't risky, which is Brian Reynolds, we've talked about this yesterday, you're going to have to pay a pretty penny. So, ultimately it comes down to, I think Kepler just ends up being the best match between project guy and there's no long-term prospect, financial, or even playing time commitment that you have to make to the guy because you still have internal options like, again, Oswaldo Cabrera.
Look, Max Kepler is the epitome of a boom or bust idea player for the Yankees. He either could be very good, like what we thought Joey Gallo would be, or he could be absolutely horrendous. Now, here's the thing. He's only going to be horrendous as an offensive player. Defensively, he's very, very good. If you look at his percentile rankings on Baseball Savant, it's all red. That's a good thing, right? He also puts the ball. He's not like a big spray kind of hitter. He pulls the ball a lot. And Ryan, I know you love hitters that pull the ball efficiently, and he does that. Like you mentioned, the shift being banned, Kepler is going to dominate because of that. A lot of opportunities where those pull balls were otherwise probably outs or just being hurt because of the shift. He's going to get on base more because of that. Last year, obviously finished with a 32% on base rate. So, you're looking at that number probably increasing, even if he ends up at 34% on base rate. He's hitting 240. And I think that's possible because of the shift. I think that's pretty good. He only strikes out at about 15%, right? Or last year at the very least, his career average is about 18%, but last year 15%. He's a double-digit walk guy every single season. I think this guy in Yankee Stadium would be very, very good. I think that his home run totals would probably increase. He had 19 in 2021, only 9 last year. Keep that in mind, but. I definitely think with that short right porch, that number probably hovers around 15 to 20, which is okay if he's getting on base 34, 35%, which I think is doable for him. But if you look at, all of his percentile rankings, his top ones, outs above average, 97th percentile, outfielder jump, about 70th percentile, arm strength, 73rd percentile, sprint speed, 64th percentile, chase rate, 80th percentile, whiff rate, 70th percentile, his strikeout rates in the 88th percentile, walk rate, 84th, and here's an interesting one, Ryan, that you might be able to give me a little bit more insight into. His average exit velocity ranks in the 51st percentile and his hard hit rate is the 49th percentile, but his max exit velocity is in the 93rd percentile, right? So how is it that he's able to hit the ball so hard on occasion, but he generally doesn't hit the ball that hard? You clearly see the powers there. If the Yankees get him to kind of adapt to the mindset of hitting strikes hard, I think that exit velocity could probably spike into like this 65, 70th percentile, which would be very, very good. A lot more home runs, a lot more hard hit balls, putting balls in play, and just focusing on strikes. And, he has good vision in the sense that like he doesn't strike out a lot. He walks a lot, so he's patient. He could probably be a perfect fit for the Yankees. And defensively, he's a stud. Offensively, if he takes a step forward, and, he's young. What is he, 29 years old? He's a young guy, in respect to, baseball. I think that he could be a great fit for the Yankees and ultimately be what Joey Gallo never ended up being for us.
Yeah, so one thing I really want to hammer on here, what you mentioned with that, the hard hit rates and the discrepancy with that is max exit velocity. Let's look at Anthony Rizzo for a second. 91st percentile max exit velocity, 57th percentile average exit velocity, 56th percentile hard hit rate, right? There are certain guys who don't hit the ball hard on average as much as they can do in their max exit velocity. And the reason for that seems to be that both these guys are fly ball hitters. It's really hard to hit the ball hard in the air. If you think about it, if you're swinging and you're swinging straight down, right, you can really hit the absolute crap out of the ball. But if you're trying to get loft, that takes a lot of strength. You're going to hit a lot of your soft hit balls are not ground balls. They're going to be fly balls. They're going to be pop-ups. They're going to be, pitches you got jammed on, right? Look at Stanton's like hardest hit ball. I'm pretty sure it was a double play, right? It was a ground ball. It was not a home run. You don't see guys that their max exit velocities come on home runs. That never really happens, right? So when we're looking at a guy like Max Kepler, his max exit velocity last year, if I'm not mistaken, came on a ground ball right to someone. It's hard to hit the ball hard in the air. And you can, again, like you mentioned with the pull rates, you can really mitigate that by pulling the ball more because you'll get more distance. The way the ball spins, when you pull the ball, it generates, you can generate a higher average distance in terms of how far you're hitting the ball. StatCast proves this. It's the average fly ball distance for fly balls that were pulled was over 340 feet, while for opposite field and center hit, it was under 300. So, it's not like just a uniquely Max Kepler thing. This is a universal thing that happens to all hitters. They tend to hit the ball farther when they pull it. So ultimately for Max Kepler, I look at him and I'm like, this can be an Anthony Rizzo 2.0. Let's look at the whiff rates. 60% whiff rate for Rizzo last year, 78th or 60th percentile whiff rate for Rizzo last year, 78th percentile for Kepler last year. Both these guys do not swing and miss. In terms of strikeout percentage, they were very similar, under 20%. Rizzo was in the 69th percentile, Kepler was in the 88th percentile. So Kepler doesn't strike out as much, but that gap is still really marginal, like 3 or 4%. In terms of barrel rate, Rizzo gets more barrels. Kepler doesn't, or at least this year he didn't. I know last year he was in the 71st percentile. Last year's profile probably mirrors a lot more what you would want him to be at, just because he was a little bit more of a fly ball hitter. Though I will note, Kepler suffered an injury in the second half last year, kind of similar to LeMahieu, where the guy gets injured, he comes back, and he's not close to what he is, and he gets shut down at the end of the season. Before that injury, at a 115 WRC plus, and you mentioned can he be a 340 on base guy with a 240 average? That's exactly what he did. 244 average and 344 on base percentage. The slugging percentage was really lacking, right? So if we can get that isolated power to near 200, if we can kind of get him to be what Anthony Rizzo's been for the Yankees, that's really the goal here, right? A fly ball hitter, a pull extreme fly ball hitter who is not going to whiff a ton, who is going to be able to get on base, who's not going to hit for high average because fly balls have a really low batting average on balls in play. You accept those things because the guy is not going to put a bat at bat, right? The number I'm looking for here in terms of OPS plus or WRC plus, whichever metric you favor, is in that 110 to 120 range, right? If you fall anywhere between there, the Yankees get a huge boost. I think a lot of people are forgetting left field was an enigma for the Yankees last year. To start the year, they had Joey Gallo. Then at some point, Aaron Hicks became the left fielder. And then Benintendi became the left fielder. And he didn't play so well until towards the end of his tenure. And then he got hurt. So Oswaldo Cabrera became the left fielder. And then Aaron Hicks was the left fielder in the playoffs for a little bit. And, it was a nightmare. That position was really just not set in stone. If Max Kepler gives you if Max Kepler can somehow push a 120 WRC plus, which I think he can with the home run rates going up in Yankee Stadium, and again, with the shift being limited, it's not exactly banned, but you're going to see an increase in batting average for guys like Kepler who are extreme pull hitters. This could be a really good fit for the Yankees. And again, as you mentioned, the defense is great. The base running is really good too. I think, with bigger bases, he could go out and steal more bases. Ultimately, he's going to provide a lot of the things the Yankees kind of need, which is contact. They're going to need some more power in that lineup. They're going to need some, good plate discipline. These are things the Yankees really struggled against with the Houston Astros. They just couldn't lay off of pitches they should have been laying off of. They made terrible swing decisions. And this team needs to be more disciplined. I know a lot of people are upset with the way the lineup looks right now, saying, this isn't a good lineup, but I implore a lot of people to really look at what this lineup is right now and look at where it was last year, right? If you look at where it was on game one of the ALCS or even on opening day, that lineup is worse than the lineup that you would have with Max Kepler in it, or just right now with Oswaldo Cabrera in left field, right? Your shortstop position has more upside offensively. You're not playing Donaldson as much. You're playing LeMahieu more. Glaber's still there. Judge is still there. Stanton is still there. And I imagine Stanton gets a little bit better as Judge gets a little bit worse, because he's not going to repeat that season. You still have Rizzo in the equation. You have a lot of young talent coming up as well. If Kepler is to, not be the best bat in the world, who's to say Austin Wells can't come up and become, fill in some time in left field as the Yankees look for that external at the deadline, right? They have so much young talent in their farm that can help supplement them. That's something they really didn't have last year until later in the season. And then by that point, I think it was too late. Right. They really only had Cabrera, who was ready to play every single day for in a postseason. Peraza wasn't built up for that. So, ultimately, Kepler there's an easy way out if he plays poorly, and you have a lot to gain if you are able to get him to replicate the profile that Rizzo's been able to replicate in Yankee Stadium, because they're very similar hitters.
Absolutely. So, okay, here's my main point about Kepler that I think will be the determining factor if he does come here. I think that he could be very good for the Yankees, and he's a much cheaper option than obviously acquiring Brian Reynolds. The biggest variable for Max Kepler is, can he handle the smoke in New York City? You know what I mean? That it's the mental component that I think gets to players here. You know, you look at Joey Gallo; he's a good player when he's confident, but he got completely shredded. You know what I mean? You got to stay off social media. You got to just do your thing. You just cancel out all the noise somehow, some way. You got to take that variable out of you. You cannot let the fans get to you. If Kepler can be, a sustainable option and not let any negativity get to him, and he can play on a big stage in the biggest city, the brightest city in the world, this is that will make him a lot better. It's the mental component that really deteriorates people, playing on professional sports teams in New York and across every sport. You look at every sport, Julius Randle for the Knicks. You look at, even guys like Kadarius Toney for the Giants and Zach Wilson for the Jets. Those guys got absolutely obliterated, end up saying the wrong thing, end up, not playing well and not being motivated or confident. And that's what really ends up happening for players that come to New York. I think that Carlos Rodon's got it. I think that Judge obviously has it. I think most of what the Yankees are doing, they're adding pieces that are electrifying. And guys that are energizer bunnies get a little bit more slack than others. Like Harrison Bader, Oswaldo Cabrera. Cabrera was not a good offensive player last year. He was a very good defensive player, but he got hyped. He brought energy to the group. He was someone that brought the fans together too. If Kepler can bring that kind of attitude, that kind of mentality, and fight through any bad appearances or cold streaks, he can be good for this Yankee team. And I think that he projects well for what the Yankees actually try to do and the stadium. So I think that that's probably the player they go with. I think that's the much more likely scenario over Brian Reynolds. And you're talking about a much cheaper acquisition. Like, Ryan, right now you put together an interesting, mock trade a couple days ago for me with Lucas Licky and Domingo Herman, but obviously Licky got DFA'd. So right now, what are you looking at in terms of capital you'd have to give up to acquire Kepler if they were going to go that route?
I still think Herman's the biggest part of that trade because I think the Twins need a starting pitcher. They'd probably like to have one with some control like Herman. Not too expensive either in terms of his arbitration. The Twins are gonna be saving money trading Kepler. So I think that's still something that interests them. There's got to be, there's probably some lower level arms that they could be interested in. I know Edgar Barclay is someone who's kind of quietly risen up the ranks in terms of relievers for the Yankees. I really don't think this trade breaks the Yankees back in terms of prospect capital. The Twins at some point are going to have to trade Kepler. They don't really have a starting spot for him. We mentioned, we've talked about, outfielders. Joey Gallo just signed with the Twins. So, they don't really have a spot for him, right? It's Gallo, Buxton, and I believe it's Kirilloff in that outfield, if I'm not mistaken, or is it Larnack? But I know it's one of those two. They don't have room for Kepler. They have a lot of left-handed outfielders, which is kind of a funny problem because we would like to have a plethora of left-handed outfielders, I imagine. Ultimately the Twins, not that they are desperate to trade him, but it seems like an expensive fourth outfielder to have when you can convert that for a starting pitcher. Especially since the rotation, they might be looking to move Sonny Gray. I know that there's some reports about that. Kenta Maeda might be someone they're looking to move. Both those guys, I believe, are on expiring contracts. One of those two get pushed out of the rotation because they got traded. Having Herman in there stabilize at least that 4 or 5 spot in that rotation. Ultimately, I think that's kind of where you look at, maybe another minor league arm, but Herman definitely becomes the center of that package. You mentioned a lot, really good point about, handling New York. There are guys who've even succeeded who talk about how daunting New York is. Chris Bassett wasn't bad last year by any stretch. He was a pretty good pitcher. And even he talked about New York is tough. New York was tough on him. New York is a tough environment to play in. Obviously, we can't test the metal of how, Kepler would react to New York until he gets here. And I do think a lot of people sometimes can tend to point to, oh, it's New York as a reason the guy fails, when sometimes it's just a matter of the guy just wasn't very good, or the guy, just had struggles. But ultimately it is a tough market to play in, but I think for some people, it brings out the best in them. And I think for Kepler, playing in a market where, the stadium's built for him, I think the fans are going to embrace having a new left fielder, a left-handed left fielder, one who doesn't strike out a lot. He knows that if his game's contact and power, he's gonna be well liked in New York if he's able to put that power aspect of it together. And I think again, there's the Yankees tend to really like these molds of hitters where they're left-handed, they can get them to pull the ball. They're getting Benintendi to pull the ball. Max Kepler is going to do just fine in New York in terms of the stadium fit. This is an organization that like it or not, the Yankees do tend to get a lot good out of players. They rarely really flop completely with a player. Gallo's like the only player I can really think of that was a complete and utter dud. Gray, I know, was a dud in that second year, but the first year was still pretty good. And Happ, same situation. That first year was pretty good. Second year was really bad. So the Yankees are able to get the most out of their players. I think that this is an organization that I can trust it with player development. That I can trust to get to, if they like a guy, if they identify a player they like, they're going to go out and get them, and they're going to get them because that player is good. And the Yankees have enough internal options. Again, worst case scenario, Cabrera ends up playing left field from like June to July 31st, and the Yankees trade for a left fielder, and we continue the carousel of corner outfielders. But with that, that's really, there's no risk here. It's really, there's no risk. It's a club option. It doesn't cost a ton. There's no risk in this deal for the Yankees.
Yeah, I agree. It's going to be such an easy deal comparably to Brian Reynolds, who obviously the Pittsburgh Pirates are looking for top pitching prospects, and we just don't have any right now that are of that magnitude. So you're going to have to give up Dominguez or Volpe or Peraza. So, we discussed that yesterday. If you missed that on that episode, go check it out. But Kepler definitely makes sense. I know a lot of people do not want him, but unfortunately, that's one of the better options on the table right now for us. Without breaking the bank. I don't want to give up Dominguez. And people have suggested, like, don't be prospect huggers and stuff like that. But guys, like, it's okay. We've traded Waldichuk and Wisniewski. Like, it's just these three prospects are going to play big roles for us. It's not like we're on the fence about them. Dominguez is going to be an outfielder for us in the future. Peraza is about to make an impact right now. Volpe is about to make an impact right now. Austin Wells, even him, you discussed it too, going to make an impact very, very shortly. These are guys that are ready to help us right now. We need to give them that chance before we trade them away for Brian Reynolds. And yes, Brian Reynolds is very, very good, but last year wasn't like an astronomically great season for him. He wasn't like insane by any means. He had 27 homers, yes. But defensively, he's a liability in some respects. His whiff rate, as you mentioned yesterday, has gone up a lot. Like there's a very real possibility he does not get back to his 2021 self. And are we willing to risk it for the biscuit in that sense? I think that's a huge risk that I don't feel necessarily is worth taking right now. But if you do, obviously respect your opinion, and always happy to hear your perspectives below in the YouTube comments. This is why we do it. We love to hear from you guys. Love to have some good conversation. We're wrong all the time. Everyone else is wrong all the time. It is what it is. But hopefully you guys enjoy the rest of your Friday. Make sure to like and subscribe as always, and safe traveling if you're going home to see family for the holidays. So stay safe out there. It's definitely cold in New York City. Very, very cold. It's gonna be like 10 degrees later. So stay indoors and stay warm. Much love as always, and sending love to you and your families. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll catch you guys on the next Fireside Yankees episode.